The NFL as we know it is the juggernaut of professional sports. 32 teams around the United States, games being played in the US, but also an expansion to London. There are 53 players on each team with multiple coaching staffs, but the biggest issue dates back to the beginning of the NFL with the inclusion of African Americans in the league. At one time, they were not allowed in the NFL. Well, when certain players broke down that barrier, more came after. Now you may say or think, how could it be possible with the opportunities at every position for every team? Well, there's an undertone of the NFL that many do not discuss or do not want to believe. Well, the NFL has multiple positions. There was one that was only deemed for white people, and that was the quarterback position. Throughout the history of the NFL, you had a few black quarterbacks, but did not achieve Super Bowl status. It wasn't until 1987 when Doug Williams became the first black quarterback to win the Super Bowl MVP with the Washington Redskins. No, that's not the argument today. Even though the quarterbacks are a major position on the field, it is the head coaches who runs the whole team, and it has only been less than 5% of black coaches in the NFL. Because of this, the NFL has gotten so terrible that they introduced the Rooney Rule, which was marked after Dan Rooney, the previous owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Rooney Rule means that teams have to interview blacks and minorities for the head coaching position and other staff positions. Now you would think after Super Bowl 41, in which Tony Dungy became the first African American head coach to win the Super Bowl when his Indianapolis Colts beat the Chicago Bears. Now, you had a black quarterback Super Bowl MVP, African American head coach win the Super Bowl. You would think there'd be more black head coaches in the NFL, right? Wrong.
And there are 3 African American head coaches in the National Football League.
Yo, Jim Caldwell is not hired.
Wait a minute.
Chris Richard.
Hold on, guys.
Sorry, yep.
There is Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. The man's won 65% of his games and has never had a losing season. There is Anthony Lynn, who struggled this year because Phillip Rivers ain't what he once was. But he was in the divisional playoff round last year. Mm-hmm. He's the reason Lamar Jackson went home early. Okay? And Brian Flores is in Miami coaching a team that none of us thought would win a damn game. Yeah. We were actually having a debate as to whether or not this would be the worst team in the history of the National Football League. And the man won 5 games, including 2 playoff teams he beat this year. He actually beat more playoff teams this year than the Buffalo Bills did.
And was a coordinator.
Okay. And was coordinator, okay?
Brothers who usually get a job coach and get the worst teams. And they do.
They do, yeah.
And they're expected to turn it around right away. They don't get the option. Jeff Fisher just got a 2-year extension. Mm-hmm. They're 4-8. He's 3-9. Fisher gets a 2-year extension, and he hasn't had a winning record or made the playoffs in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. Who gets an extension after mediocre play and non-playoff stuff?
He hasn't won a playoff game in 13 years.
That's ridiculous.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Well, they may not just be any decent African American or minority coaches that's available right now. Okay. Let me throw a flag to that. So please explain to me why this man, Eric Bieniemy, did not get a job as a head coach, or didn't even get interviewed for a head coach. Now, for those who don't know who Eric Bieniemy is the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, the team that just won the Super Bowl. They had the Super Bowl MVP of Patrick Mahomes. They just had the Legion of Zoom on the receivers. Yeah, he commanded that offense. And what made it so terrible is that reports came out that Andy Reid was calling the offensive plays. Once again, trying to diminish African Americans' job. But Andy Reid heard the reports, came out and said that it's really Eric Bieniemy who has been calling the plays on the Kansas City Chiefs. And with this new lead of passing 100 times a game, you would think a man who commanded possibly one of the greatest offensive juggernauts in the NFL history didn't even get an interview. Sounds suspicious? Well, if that doesn't convince you, take a listen to one of the sports commentators on the TV show Speak for Yourself, and how there's a new trend called analytics that may be designed to hold black coaches down.
It does play a small part in why we haven't seen as many minority coaches. I think you have to kind of run it up the flagpole. The people that hire are your general managers. And so when you have an embrace of analytics at the highest level, most of those people come from, no disrespect to Ivy League, but Ivy League schools. Yeah. And much like you've seen baseball, where baseball has become very Ivy League heavy in those upper management positions, where you're not having a lot of people of color that are there.
So in my opinion, is this an issue in the NFL? Yes. There are plenty of qualified candidates who are African American or minorities that should be a head coach. But until then, until players, coaches, critics, and whoever steps in and say NFL hire more black coaches, this right here will continue to happen. I'm Ricardo Hicks. Have a good night.